We all make lots of mistakes when we're learning something new, but as a teacher working with lots of beginners and intermediate players, it tends to be the same things that you see crop up again and again. There's loads that I can think of, but I've narrowed it down to 5 for this video to help you avoid making these mistakes yourself. You might not even realise that you're making them, and to help you speed up your progress. Let me know in the comments which mistakes on or off this list you've made yourself or what you think others should avoid. Okay, so the first mistake. When you're a beginner, it's really important that when you're learning a new piece or rehearsing a section or even just working on an exercise like scales or your broken chords or something like that, that you consistently check that you're using the same fingering every time. What can quite often happen is that when you first start learning something, you don't take the time to plan out the best fingering to start with, or you do, and then after a few goes, you've started thinking about other stuff, and without even realising it, you've slightly changed a couple of bits, or perhaps sometimes completely changed it. When we're learning something on piano, we're trying to rehearse a routine to build a habit, and that includes rehearsing what the notes are, of course, the movement, and really importantly, the fingers. And a crucial part of that to build that habit so that at some point it sinks in and it feels easy to play is that we repeat it in a particular way and we have lots of repetition, lots of practice too. But if you're practicing it wrong and haven't worked out the best fingers, then obviously that's just going to make it harder and more frustrating to learn. You might not be able to play it properly or even at all. If you were playing this part of Fur Elise, for example, then the good fingers for the right hand to use there would be 1, 2, and then move over to 4 and 5 so you can reach everything. But you might end up a lot of people might start putting 5 on the A by accident. But then you get stuck not being able to reach the next note above without doing something awkward. You have to make sure that you learn the fingering that works the best and then be sure to stick to it when you're practicing. There's quite often different fingering options that you could use. So for this part of Fur Elise, I tend to do this, starting on finger 2. You could easily start on your thumb though, and it works just as well. You can still reach down here. But as a beginner, you want to practice it the same way, or it's like you're trying to learn 2 different things. It's like learning 2 different routines. Imagine you're learning lines in a play. It's like trying to learn 2 different sentences. And when the moment comes, you're not going to be sure which one to say. You want to be confident and you want it to be automatic which finger to go down. And that hesitation, well, we'll probably hear that in the rhythm, and it's likely going to throw you off and could cause you to mess up that run through. So all the while you're practicing something different ways with different fingers, you're not getting in that real practice, that good quality practice, which is going to allow you to internalize something so it feels easy and effortless. Just to point out that more advanced players who are playing something that's well within their skill level may end up using different fingers for stuff because they've developed enough skill and control to get away with it. But for beginners, that's not the best thing to do. By the way, if this video is helpful for you or you want to see a follow-up with some more mistakes to avoid then let me know by hitting the like button. The second mistake most people are guilty of, it's a really bad practice habit, and that is to constantly go over the easy moments. It's usually like the beginning of the piece, the bit that you started learning first, and avoiding the later bits or any difficult moments. Avoiding them or just not working on them as much. We do this because it's fun, right? And it feels good to play something that you can do well. But if you're trying to avoid wasting time at the piano and make more progress, we want to try and be a bit more efficient. If you think logically about it, the harder bits, which are often just the bits that aren't as familiar, that you haven't practiced as much, we need to spend more time on them than the other bits. We want those bits to feel fun and easy as well, but if you keep playing the fun and easy bits, they won't. Quite often the beginning feels easier purely because you've been playing it longer, you're more familiar with it. And of course people just keep starting over from the beginning, keep playing the beginning bit without getting to the end. So avoid doing that. You've got to make sure to try and put as much time into the later section, all the while still maintaining the first part. But it can also often just be specific difficult moments anywhere that people just gloss over, and then you just end up with a weak link in the chain. So if you're trying to learn this, comment below if you know what that is. The tricky moment for people is often this bit. So that moment is the bit to practice in isolation by itself instead of only doing it when you have a run through right from the beginning. And if that bit's not sounding right, don't just keep playing past it without ever going back to fix the problem. It's not just about time. You obviously still have to make sure you're thinking mindfully about how to practice that particular moment in the best way. What's the best strategy to make sure that you can get that bit feeling as comfortable as the rest? This might be the mistake that people make most often, and that's trying to practice or learn something or play stuff that's just too fast, way above your speed limit. When you're trying to learn something by practicing it too fast, not only does it not really work, it doesn't help you get anywhere, but it can actually cause more problems too. This is probably the easiest problem to fix. You just have to slow down, but you have to stay mindful of the fact, because a lot of people start that way and then after a couple of goes, they've sped up without realizing it. Or they have a couple of goes at a good tempo and then they think they've got it and then they try and suddenly do it at full tempo and they can't keep up with it yet. They keep making mistakes. It just doesn't work. We talked about rehearsing a routine earlier. You're trying to ingrain everything that you're doing. There's lots to think about. Let's say you're working on this bit of minuet in G. Well, if you're a beginner, that might be a lot to manage. So trying to actually learn that and piece it together and figure out how to do everything at full speed, there's just too much going on to think about. You're never going to keep up with it. It's trying to listen to someone speaking really fast in a foreign language when you can only speak it a little bit. You need them to slow down. You're trying to remember the notes in both hands. You're trying to remember the fingers in both hands. You're trying to get the movement and you're trying to fit your hands together, figure out where this hand meets up with that hand. We have to learn it much slower. And when you do that, it makes everything that you need to do that much more clear in your mind. And when you've got it solidly, then you can speed it up. Once you start to speed it up, then you can kind of tweak the performance a little bit, but you usually need to get the basic mechanics down slowly to piece it together. Don't fall into the trap of getting it right once and then suddenly going from really slow to full tempo. You need to really practice it slow first until it's definitely solid before you speed it up. And when you do speed it up, you actually have a much better chance of building it up stronger and maintaining the control and everything to actually make it sound musical. Because you know what it's like, you hear when people play stuff that's too fast for them and it's like they're trying to run too fast and they trip over. Their technique goes, it sounds messy when you're just not ready to speed it up yet. If you want to play fast, you have to think slow over a longer period of time so you can develop the technique to support it. This one's sort of two things. A lot of beginner players forget to listen and to use their ears when they're playing music, and also they don't put any time into training their ears. So just on a basic level, when we're first learning, we've got so much brain energy going on the mechanics and remembering the notes and everything that we forget to listen. But we need to start trying to get used to it because, you know, you see people making mistakes or not quite getting it to sound right when they're playing it without even realizing. Maybe they've played a wrong note without realizing. People often hesitate and slow down when they get to a difficult bit. Sometimes they speed up and slow down throughout too. Maybe the rhythm's off, maybe they're playing it roughly and catching notes together, or maybe all that stuff's fine, but you're not quite bringing the right sound out of the piano. Maybe the touch and the feel of the music isn't quite there, the dynamics and the articulation maybe aren't quite right. But as you're playing, I always encourage people to try and listen as though you're listening to somebody else play it and imagine how you would want the music to sound. You've got to try and hear those mistakes that you're making in order to fix them, and if you want the music to sound as good as it can, you've got to try and hear it in your head before you can create that sound. Really listening is going to give us that emotional connection with the music and help you bring out a greater sense of musicality. A mistake a lot of beginners make is to not spend any time training their ears as well and getting their ears used to hearing the details and the things happening in music, listening for the different musical elements going on. It's such an important area of learning music. Music's something we listen to, and it really does improve all areas of your musicianship, no matter what kind of music that you like to play. It's going to help you learn stuff much easier and much quicker. It's going to help you memorize stuff much better and much stronger. It's going to help you guide your hands at the piano because you can kind of recognize the sound of what should come next. It's going to remind you of what to do. It even helps reading because you recognize that what you've played from the sheet sounds right, and work things out by ear and get ideas out your head, come up with your own music and find things on the piano. There's lots of things to do, even starting really basic, like what kind of range things sit in, recognizing how high or low you're playing something, when things are moving up or when they're moving down. The shape of how things move, whether they're moving in seconds like that, kind of like next door on the scale, or whether it's bigger leaps like thirds like you'd use in chords. We want to eventually learn to recognize lots of different musical elements like the sound of chords, how far notes move, intervals. We want to recognize where notes sit inside the key. We want to recognize different harmonies, different chord progressions. You get to also rely on another sense, one that gives you a stronger connection to the sound of the music. And when you combine that with the visual side and the physical side of recognizing and playing things on the keyboard, everything compounds and it strengthens your ability to learn and memorize things. Just before the last tip, remember to hit the like button if you want to see a follow-up to this video with some more mistakes to avoid in. And over on Patreon, I will be posting a companion to this video with 4 extra mistakes to watch out for. There's a link for that below, and there's a few links to some other videos you may find useful. The last one was 5 things I wish I knew when I first started learning, which is kind of like more mistakes, but specifically things I wish I'd done better. And you'll also find some links for some helpful PDFs I have available from my website. Things like all the fingerings for the major and minor scales and how to build different chords and a few other things like that. The last mistake on the list is to avoid upgrading to a better quality keyboard that probably has better sound and that importantly has fully weighted keys that are meant to mimic the keys like that of a real acoustic piano. Now I completely understand that a lot of people start learning on something cheaper that often doesn't have fully weighted keys or maybe isn't full size as well. And that makes sense because we can't often invest money in something that we're trying out for the first time. Obviously you're going to learn a lot more on a cheaper keyboard than nothing at all, but at some point if you're going to carry on, it's really worth thinking about upgrading because you're missing out on some important elements of playing that you can only really achieve when you have proper keys, because you need to get used to the feel of them, the action of the keys, and there's lots of implications for your technique, how it feels to push them down, how you move around and things, and the kind of touch and the feel of them and the kind of sound you can make with them. I do get asked about these a lot on YouTube and by students and parents and things, so I've put a couple of links in the description. There's basically 2 keyboards that I always recommend, which I think are the 2 best quality beginner entry-level keyboards that have fully weighted keys, nice feel, nice sound, and full size. Well, that's all 5 for this video. Remember, let me know down below if you want to see another video with some more mistakes in, and let me know if you have any questions too. Thanks for watching.